books present a danger in that regard because they are a portal to discovery, information, imagination, all of those things. And the digital realm has removed that to a great
Mm.
degree. On the topic of the digital realm, I have to add that the concern of the board and other elements about books causing harm is completely without context in our present era when students are carrying around in their pocket, typically, a device that gives them access to far more harmful content,
Oh,
ideas, whatever you
yep.
than any library, school, or otherwise would have within its walls. So it's just such a ridiculous argument that they're protecting students or anyone from harm to use that as an excuse to get rid of a book.
Freedom Feature with Barry Bussey.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Freedom Featured. I'm your host, Barry Bussey. With me today, I have Larry Farquharson, who's a retired now teacher in the London area, but he was for a number of years a teacher librarian at the H.B. Beal Secondary School in London. But controversy has arisen, and that's why we're going to have a conversation, as we're going to be talking about the fact that the school went through a purging of some 10,000 volumes for the library. And so we want to dig into that and look at the consequences. Larry, it's great to have you with us today.
Thank you very much for having me and having this conversation.
You know, Larry, as I read the story in the National Post and then also in the London Free Press, and by the way, I should say that I lived in London for 3 years when I went to law school at Western some years back. So many years, I can almost hardly remember, but it was like 30 plus years or so.
Mm.
And, you know, as I read through this story and saw what was happening, I just like, man, we got to have a conversation. And so it's so awesome that you're able to be here. Now, I'm just wondering if you could just share with the audience your experience and the work that you were doing at the H.B. Beal Secondary School.
Well, my title was Department Head of Library and the teacher librarian, the primary teacher librarian. Because of the size of the school, staffing allocations for library is by lines, they're called. And so I had a colleague with me to cover what's called a prep period. So there were two of us in the library each semester. So my role as teacher librarian was to manage that as a classroom and this a space that was accessible to students. We can get into some of the dynamics of that later if it comes up, but that was the primary thing, and I managed the space and the collection.
Mm. So now, what like I remember, you know, being in school, of course, and my secondary schooling career, as it were. And one of the things I really enjoyed, I loved libraries. In fact, I love books, and I've got literally thousands of books here at my house, of which my wife is like, Barry, stop buying books. And she'll also say to me sometimes, you know, I would never want it to have a choice between me and your books because I'm not sure what you would choose. But anyhow, so I kind of have to work on that a little bit. But the thing is that books are something that has always excited me in the sense of in history. I would imagine that you'd have a lot of students who were like me and perhaps like you that would just love to walk down the aisle of the library and like, oh man, that looks like an interesting book and pull it off. And so what kind of experience did you have with students who kind of just have that natural curiosity?
That's a bit of a loaded question in the present era because there are a lot of external distractions that have significantly impacted that aspect of what libraries used to kind of be a destination for, namely the technology that's in people's pockets.
Right.
So for the, I would say, increasingly rare student who actually values the printed book, uh, certainly a library is a refuge to access those kinds of escapes, if you like, or information. I
Mhm.
mean, there's such a broad range of, of purposes that a library serves. But that's the point of having a broad collection, is to attract students to enjoy a broad range of ideas, opinions, opposing viewpoints, whatever it is, so that they can
Mhm.
explore and actually develop kind of that fundamental element of any education, which is critical inquiry.
Mm.
And that to me is the basis of all education, is critical thinking, critical inquiry. And if you
Right.
think of a library as that portal to vast amounts of information, that's the perfect place to explore all of those potentials.
Mm. So what was happening here now? Like, why is it, and can you just explain to the audience, like, how is it that, there was a literal purge of books in your library? Are they trying to shut down the library? Are they trying to downsize it? Like, what was behind this? And can you just explain exactly what happened?
Well, again, that's a bit of a loaded question, because I think there are multiple layers to that. I mean, if
Okay.
you wanted to be conspiratorial, certainly with the increased prevalence of digital information, there are
Mhm.
people who argue there's no need to have anything in print anymore, and so of course the library would become uh, uh, relegated to the dustbin, because you don't need a collection of books if it's all available online. We can have a
Mm.
discussion about that later, because that's completely fallacious. But um, the uh, the library is a very important element of retaining access. And so this process began, and it's not just Beal that is targeted with this, by the way. And it's not just school libraries, it's all libraries are being, uh, I would say, attacked by elements, and it's both ends of the spectrum, who demand that this end not have access to the material they want uh, uh, um, to be censored, and the other end of the spectrum has the same. And so both of them are gunning for censorship, really. They won't call it that, but that's the bottom line of what it is.
So,
And
when you're saying the spectrum, you're meaning like the political
political
spectrum, like the
spectrum.
left, the right, that
Yes,
kind of thing?
I don't like labels, but
Right.
absolutely, the polarization of ideas is,
Mm.
you're not allowed to have opposing ideas anymore. You can't have criticism and conversation, because now it's just automatically given a label like hate, for example. And
Right.
so those extremes are both after the same end. And the point of a library is to remain absolutely neutral,
Mm.
apolitical, so that all viewpoints, opposing viewpoints, are reflected in what a library has available to access. That's kind of the crux of my argument of why I'm so opposed to what's happened, because this the implementation of this uh, program called the Inclusive Libraries and Revitalization Project is the underpinning uh, agenda that was brought to Beal, and not just Beal, but other school libraries and the board, to get rid of books that they deemed X, Y, and Z. I mean, they used all sorts of words and labels in their. Uh, if you had a look at that memo that I included in my
Mm.
Substack, uh, but it's very difficult, um, because those words are very subjective, and will change depending on your perspective. And that's why, for example, the word harm. It's not for me to judge what's harmful to anyone. uh,
Mhm.
in the context of a library, because that automatically has a connotation of censorship, and I
Right.
refuse that. I reject that, particularly in the context of a secondary school library. You can apply something very differently to an elementary school, but in a
Mhm.
secondary school, as I believe, there's uh, room for a wide range of controversial material uh,
Mm.
for maturing young adults to be able to access. But that doesn't align with this agenda. And so
So when you say they and when you say the agenda, who are they and exactly what is the agenda that's going on? And is it coming from the government? Is it coming from like where is this?
it's the evolution of that uh, control that's being placed on what can be said, who can say it, how you can say it, that expression. And we're seeing that manifest in the legislation that's being proposed in the Parliament of Canada now, for example, that these bills that they're proposing to put
Like Bill
clamps on.
C9, for example.
Correct. And
Yeah.
so this is an extension of that, an example of that in extreme form.
Mm,
But I mean, there's many uh, aspects of how they selected material, and I didn't, as I said, I didn't involve myself in the process because I refused to be involved in this
mm,
kind of extreme purge that was taking place. So that memo was one aspect, but and the board has put out a kind of a counteracting. I don't know if people saw that CBC story. They included the statement. I don't have it in front of me, but they used very loaded words that I'll address at some point to justify what to me is indefensible. Uh, and I want to make it clear. I'm not opposed to weeding books uh, that are in disrepair and uh, have outdated data and that sorts of things. But they they took the opportunity to go to the extreme to not just remove books that were identified according to those labels in that memo, but
mhm,
also books that were of a particular age. And I don't think there was a necessary cutoff, but there's this data point in libraries called collection age, and it's the average age of the publication dates of books. And I don't like that uh,
mm,
data because it lacks context.
right.
And I'll probably use that word quite often in our conversation because a lot of this lacks context. But the context in that regard is that by its nature, an older school with an older library is going to have an older collection age.
Mm,
And you can't apply the same uh, collection age carte blanche across all schools because we have schools that are less than a year old. And so they'll have a very new collection and therefore have a different collection age. And so to try and gun for an average board wide collection age lacks context.
mm,
Also, a school like Beal, as an older school, is going to have books in it that are relevant to Beal, relevant to downtown London as a downtown school, relevant to the history of that local area and our geographic area.
mhm,
And those books may have an older publication date. That doesn't mean they're no longer valuable. They are, and maybe more valuable because they're a historical record that
mm,
students should have access to. But many of
right.
those books were ripped up and torn out purely because of the publication date.
It strikes me uh, strange in this respect. A number of years ago, I worked down in Washington D.C. where I worked for a nonprofit, and Folger's library was just right on back of the Library of Congress, and it had like ancient collections. I mean, we're talking hundreds and hundreds of years old books. And I got to get to know some scholars who would come in from around the world. And this one particular scholar who's in mind right now was a scholar of warfare. And the Folger family, which of course is well known because of its coffee and all of that kind of stuff, but it has this amazing library there and the Shakespearean theater and all the rest. Um, and this one gentleman that I got to know was from Britain, and he would come in because the family had collected like these ancient books that were I'm like hundreds and hundreds of years old, and he was particularly interested in warfare in the, I think it was like 14th, 15th centuries, that area. And and he was telling me all about, like it was just so amazing for him to be able to open up these books that were so old. Now, in this case, of course, you're dealing with a much newer book, but to say that books are just because they're old is somehow not appropriate or something we don't want in our libraries, it strikes me as really odd.
Well, it could go back to your earlier comment, are they trying to get rid of libraries? Because that would be an easy way to justify, oh, we don't need libraries anymore, so old books are irrelevant, and therefore it's justified to get rid of them. A practical example is they deleted all the records for the yearbooks. We had yearbooks back to the 1960s,
Okay.
and those were deleted from the database. Now, they left those books in the library, but they deleted them from the database. And the only rationale I can come up with is because they wanted to get rid of them as a data point so that it didn't affect the collection age.
Oh, wow.
Because they would be 1960, 1965, 1970, 1980, whatever it was. And they were gunning for collection age basically 10 to 15 years. So that would be 2010 at the outside. And our collection age before they did the $10,000 book deletion was 1999, and after the 10,000 were gone, it was 2007.
So is there not a real problem when we are taking away these older books because it's almost like so were a lot of these books like just history books, because I saw in the picture on one of the news articles I saw was you holding the book, the Canadian Encyclopedia, for example. What was that all about? Like, why take out that particular volume? You know?
So we actually had two copies of that. That the one in the picture was my own personal copy. I did not remove any books from Beal, but that was my own personal copy, and I used it just as a representation of the type of book that does record history. And in a single volume, you have an immense amount of information. Doesn't take a lot of space, but to get rid of those because it was published in 2000, it was. I presume, too old. And same with encyclopedia sets that we had. And so
is it the idea that it would be okay to have a modern edition of that volume, but just not the older editions? Is
that's theoretically true, but the difficulty is books like that aren't published very often anymore. There's less and less print editions of that kind of compilation of data because it's quote unquote online, and therefore the rationale is, well, we don't need it in print if it's available online. The problem with that is anything online can be revised, and
you know what? Doesn't that just take you right back to 1984? The Winston, the character of 1984 by George Orwell, whose job was to rewrite the newspapers to fit the modern or the current political thinking. Like as soon as you said that, it's just like automatically comes to mind. like,
Yeah.
honestly, one of the reasons why I have three sets of encyclopedias, one from my grandfather back in the 1940s, and then the other two in the more modern age. Um, but I after reading 1984, I kind of got the idea that, you know what, I need the books because what if suddenly we get like what was the name of that movie? Was it Fahrenheit 411 or something? Uh,
451.
what was it?
Fahrenheit 451.
451. That's right. Okay. And going around destroying books, and I'm like, my word, is I don't know. I mean, it just kind of strikes me that the parallel there is just uncanny.
It is definitely a modern day parallel, and that's why it's important to raise it as an issue and have a public conversation about it. Because if we don't, these kinds of things happen behind closed doors, and nobody knows about it, and there's no accountability for the kind of devastation that is wrought based on what I would say is an ideology and
Yeah.
an agenda. And I couldn't stand by and let that go unchallenged, and so that's why I'm talking about it.
But and I'm glad you are because I think this is, to be honest with you, it kind of uh, affirms my own thinking, like lots of people will say, well, Barry, you're just being a conspiracy theorist, right? I mean, my good friend, Bruce Pardy, who's a law prof at Queen's University, often says that it seems like a lot of these conspiracy theorists tend to be perceptive pundits because what they observe and what your intuition would tell you often turns out to be exactly what happens. And so I guess I'm trying to figure out here. Um, there is, and again, there's this nebulous group that you haven't yet identified, and I don't know if you can identify or whatever it is, but there is some organization or group within, I'm assuming, the Department of Education, that are saying, look, this is what we have to do. We have to purge these schools from unacceptable material. What is that criteria? Now, you mentioned that there was a memo, but and there's this. I would have, as you mentioned, there's this language that's being used, and what I find with a lot of this bureaucratic doublespeak and all the rest is that perhaps it is nice sounding language, but unless you really understand what they're saying, you might say, okay, well, this sounds good. I mean, this is okay. This makes sense. But the net effect is you purge out a Canadian encyclopedia that is not going to be published anytime or new edition. And then the young people are without that. And I think there's so I'll just leave it there for now, but then there's other things that come to my mind. But what's your thought on
Well,
that?
I'll unpack a few things there. First of all, I'm going to kind of shift the language from conspiracy theory to conspiracy realist,
Mm,
uh, because they are, and these are, in the technical term or technical definition of conspiracy, these are absolutely identifiable agendas, and the they broadly is an institutional uh, lobby in order to in, implement this across all institutions, public and even private.
so
And
are you talking like an NGO, or like a nonprofit organization
I'm just
that's
excuse me, I'm just talking about institutional apparatuses, whether it's government or like at all levels of government, federal, provincial, municipal, uh, the different public agencies that have various elements of control, the the excuse me, the agencies that govern professional designations, like my own, which is the Ontario College of Teachers. All of those are part of the they, I would call them. And one of the acronyms I've come across in various parts of research for they is the hierarchy the hierarchy enslaving you. They are erecting these significant barriers to your freedom. And it's kind of like the proverbial frog in the boiling water. People don't recognize it as such until it's maybe too late. And I equate what I'm doing as kind of trying to sound the alarm that these kinds of things are happening, and we need to be aware of them and talk about them, and in my case, hope stop them.
Right. Okay. And so we've got this agenda. We've got so do they have is it a coherent of because obviously what's happening here, there's a sense of they want outcomes, right? So they want to have the young people of our country having particular views, kind of like having acceptable views, right? And is there well, I say a list, a description of what the young people and society itself should be arriving at, as far as, this is the acceptable view, and no one should go outside of the orthodox view?
Absolutely. You are not permitted in this present era to color outside the lines. It even goes back to 2022 when that notorious individual occupying the Prime Minister's office of Canada uttered those words, unacceptable views. Who are you to tell anyone they have an unacceptable view? And so when that kind of signaling comes from someone in the highest office, that percolates all the way across all these institutions, and it entitles people to become those agents of what I would say is censorship. And I just chafe at that, because I'm not going to let someone tell me what I can and cannot think or say or do that
Right.
is kind of abides by the golden rule. And that's what these individuals are trying to do, is impair that freedom. And this book purge is one of those. I mean, when you remove a book from a collection for any reason, you are denying someone access to that information. That's censorship.
John Milton said something to the effect that when you censor a book, when you refuse a book to be published, back in the day, because the British government didn't like certain books that were critical of it and or of its views, and John Milton referred to it as a destroying the human soul, so that because the book is a person, it has a he even referred to it as expressing the image of God or something to that effect. But anyhow, the idea is that it comes from the person. And so when we deny that book from having a place on the shelf in the library, we're actually, passing judgment on the authors of the book. We're like, it's an unacceptable view. It's, we're wanting to maintain this orthodox concept of whatever is supposed to be appropriate. And I mean, it strikes me so interesting that there's a parallel here in some ways with, the modern age is very critical of religion, for example. And I find it fascinating that in essence, the views that are being coming down from on high, from the authorities, from these groups and government and all the rest, it's kind of like, well, it's an ideology. So it's a an imposition of a particular concepts and views and all the rest, and no one dare go against them. And it it is a very scary development, it seems to me, in how we are, raising our young people.
What you described there is exactly what education has become. It's very rare that you can have a freedom of expression, dialogue, and a debate and a discourse about controversial issues without getting hauled before the hauled up on the carpet, because you're just not allowed to, as I said earlier, color outside the lines, and that has been a very significant chill effect on
Mm.
that what I referred to earlier, critical inquiry. And
Mhm.
so you use the word ideology. That's absolutely what has, I would say, invaded or infected even classrooms and education. And they have shifted significantly away from that critical inquiry learning paradigm to indoctrination. And I
Mm.
won't have anything to do with that. That is not education to me at all. It's completely antithetical to the idea of an education uh, that allows a complete freedom of exploration of ideas
Mm.
when you place those limits. And the effect of that is that teachers are very reluctant to have those kinds of conversations because they're concerned about being accused of something and being
Mhm.
disciplined, for example. And
Yep.
the same is true of students because they're reluctant to challenge anything because it might be reflected in a poor mark. Like it's
Right.
it's systemic now, I would say, in education in order to align thinking a certain way, and it is a dangerous direction. And the purge of the books is an example, like a physical example of what this looks
Mm.
like.
Yeah. It's, I look back, in my, uh, early education, I was raised in Newfoundland, and, I remember having a very heated discussion with our science teacher in grade 9, and, like, not this well, I mean, I was part of it, but the whole classroom was part of it, and, I remember, back in Newfoundland at the time, virtually all the schools were somehow connected to a particular church, and I was raised Anglican, and so I went to the integrated school, which was the United Church, Anglican, and I think Presbyterians were part of us, and Salvation Army. But anyhow, so it was an era, early '70s even, that well, I guess it would be late '70s by the time I was in grade 9, but, the thing is that we would have, robust discussions on religion and science and evolution and all of that kind of stuff, and I remember the teacher was very much a evolutionist and atheist and all of that kind of stuff, but a number of us in class, were very much, we were brought up, you just go to church every Sunday, it was kinda like part of my life. And, we would have those kinds of discussions, and I look back at it and I'm like, "Man, they probably wouldn't even allow that kind of a discussion today in schools."
Yes, I mean it's uh, for example, it can that can reveal itself in things like music repertoire
Mm,
selection.
right,
Uh, there's significant amount of repertoire is sacred. Choral
right.
repertoire, for example, is sacred, and there's a big chill on allowing those kinds of works in school music programs, which
Mm,
is shameful because those are fundamental uh, examples of the repertoire of the era. And if you want to have any kind of comprehensive understanding of the historical significance of where choral music has evolved, then you absolutely need to study that. And so
Hmm.
it cheats students out of an opportunity to explore that history when you deny them access to those kinds of works. And I mean, music teachers I know uh, understand that there's this a music curriculum would have a wide spectrum of music from all sorts of different musical genres and musical eras and so forth. That's the purpose of a music education. And
Right.
this what's happened in the library isn't limited to the library. It's
Right.
happening across the curriculum, and that is another reason why I'm speaking, because I see this as a threat, a significant threat to the kind of education that I would expect a student to be able to access, and they're being denied that.
Mm. And so the thing is, when we look at the Canadian history, um, we look at our our whole culture, our social context in which we developed as a country. There's almost, I, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but is there a sense that it's kind of like the institution itself is becoming ashamed of our history, ashamed of the ideas that were motivated by, as you mentioned with music. They were motivated by religion. It was motivated by, many of the great. And we just came from the Christmas season where it was a great opportunity for me. I went through I went to Handel's Messiah twice. I mean, I love the Handel's Messiah, and just this year I went to it twice, and it's kind of like that's powerful history right there in the music, and it's kind of like we're somehow ashamed or I don't know. I don't even know what to describe, but it's like, and the young people then are not even able to appreciate or get to know where they came from, as far as a society, as far as a civilization, as far as a country. Um, to me, it's a great loss because people need to know where they came from.
That word shame is a good way to describe what is part of this agenda. I mean, it's not
Mm,
overtly to shame, but that's the underlying result, is that you cultivate a shame, and it's being cultivated in young children in elementary
mm,
school. That they're ashamed of this of and it's that's why, to me, these are all elements of indoctrination, and
mhm,
they are uh, causing more harm than what the powers that be think they're trying to eliminate.
mm,
They don't see themselves as causing the harm, but that's the irony, is that they are actually causing the harm. For example, one of the words in that memo is decolonization, which is a
mhm.
significant weaponized buzzword of our era.
Right.
And as I've written a number of times, and they don't seem to see this hypocrisy and irony, but those attempts to address what they define as colonization, they are actually guilty of a recolonization
Right.
by decolonizing, and that's a hypocrisy that is it's not compatible. You cannot
Mhm.
have it where you get to decide what's colonization and recolonize something else.
Right.
That's the net effect of that, and so that kind of hypocrisy just does not sit well with me. I can't tolerate that.
Mm.
But that's where um, these elements come from, and at the moment they have the power and the privilege to implement those kinds of elements.
Mm.
Uh, I think there's a shift in attitude. People are getting tired of having these kinds of things shoved down their throat, and they're resisting. And certainly, the feedback that I seem to be detecting from this particular issue kind of goes along with that. Like people are very alarmed at the degree that this has happened, and of course, what I've identified is just an extreme example of this.
Yeah, and they have no worry about what the cost is, like cost to um, the young people's understanding of their own society and how they were brought up, or their history of their parents, grandparents, and so forth. But then there's also the financial costs. Now, I noticed that the loss of these books. Can you just kind of elaborate? There's financial costs, but can you elaborate some other costs that you see is the net result of this purging of these 10,000 volumes from your library?
So there's the tangible cost, and in the cataloging system that we have that records those values of books, it on paper it says $183,000 or so, but that is completely without context, because many of those records are zero. I didn't have any control whatsoever on the cataloging side of things, and so I couldn't input values and so forth. I didn't have any access to that. So whatever's in there was someone else's work, but many of those records didn't have a number, so it was zero. So that's one flaw. Another is the replacement value that was in that database doesn't reflect current replacement value.
Right.
And the third thing is many of those books are out of print and therefore they're not replaceable. So in that case, they are priceless. So that's kind of an arbitrary number that's highly undervalued. $183,000. It would be significantly more than that if you could replace those books that were removed.
Now,
Not
what happened? So sorry, I'll let you finish, and then I'll.
non-financial cost is the cost of access to information, and that's again priceless because you can't quantify that. And it's very individualized because some people who would frequently access a library, it would be a greater cost to them to someone who's never set foot in a library. And so trying to give that any kind of financial number, you can't, but it's nonetheless still significant that those opportunities to access information are gone, and that's forever. Like those books will never be back anywhere, and some of them were very 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 expensive irreplaceable books. So there's many layers to what the cost is to this.
So what happened to the actual physical books? Because to be honest with you, I'm such a bibliophile. I would like to go down with my pickup truck and start loading them up and bringing them back home to my wife's chagrin, I'm sure. But like what happened to them?
So the books were literally ripped up. The covers were ripped off, and the covers were put in black garbage bags to go to the trash. The body of the books were put in clear garbage bags, and those were taken to the recycling bin. So those books are long gone, either in the dump somewhere or in shredded up and recycled into something hopefully useful. That's a kind of a bright side of it, that they presumably went into the recycling stream. They were put in the recycling bin anyway. What happens beyond that point is anyone's guess. But no, they were all physically destroyed.
Unbelievable. So, okay. So has the ideology gotten to the point where they did not even want to have them sold like as secondhand bookstores or something, or because they were so radioactive in their thinking that like we can't even allow these books to exist? Is that the kind of thing that was going on?
Well, there's a couple of, again, contextual considerations there. It's general board policy not to give away books because they may and have ended up in secondhand bookstores and thrift stores. And that is an inappropriate thing to happen for something that's a public asset to be resold in that kind of situation.
Okay, so why? I mean,
Well,
taxpayer money paid for this, and
yes, and
shouldn't the taxpayers have a chance to buy them back or whatever?
that's a decent argument to have, absolutely. But I'm just stating what general board policy is. The other thing is, if the board has deemed a book unfit for someone to read for whatever reason, then they're not going to let anyone else read that book either.
Okay, give me a list of like I know that there is a list there of the books. So
I
what?
can't give you a list because I didn't ask questions about what book was considered what. I didn't want to know. So all I have are just the general application of the labels that they use to in their revitalization document, like harmful, like slurs, and like imagery that was deemed inappropriate, decolonization. There were a lot of indigenous works that were deleted. So there's a broad range, and there's 10,000 records in there. And I'm not going to study it in detail because I can't assess with each title exactly why it was deleted. Some of them I can maybe hazard a guess because I think the vast majority were based on date. But titles that were removed because of harm, that's their definition. And as I said earlier, it's not for me to define what is harmful.
Yeah, and I mean that's the whole debate with Bill C9 is who gets to define hate
Exactly.
or harm, and all the rest. Well,
Exactly.
this is very enlightening, I must say, and it's very disturbing because it seems to me that the people across Ontario, and if not across Canada, because no doubt the same ideological position is something that's permeating through the various bureaucracies, the educational bureaucracies across Canada. It would seem to me that as taxpayers who paid for all of these books, as a minimum, they should have an opportunity to be able to purchase them. Why? To help pay for books that are now going to be needed to replace them. So kind of helping out with the expense, the absolute complete waste and expense of government bureaucracy making decisions. And then it's the other element of a lot of these books are they're priceless, as you mentioned. They are extremely important for the history of this country. And again, the censorship that's going on here is extremely we use the bureaucrats use problematic, that's the term, or whatever. It's like, wow, like how is it that we have come to this kind of situation, to be to be so ruthless in destroying the history, the very essence of who we are as a country, that's contained in all of these things, including the Encyclopedia of Canada. I just find this I guess gobsmack is probably a good term for it, but it's very troubling, and I thank you for just kind of
I'll just
being
sum up.
willing to speak on this. But anyhow,
If I could just respond to that, because it harkens back to what you said earlier about shame. Many of what you have just talked about, books will contain aspects of what these people have deemed are shameful parts of our history, and therefore they want to eradicate and erase them. But that the danger there is that we now have prevented this generation, future generations, to learn from those eras and contextualize them appropriately, because now they don't have the opportunity to access it. That is really the shame of this, is that you have now
yes,
denied learning opportunities. I mean, there's so many layers to this. It's just so disturbing, and I'm glad that we're able to give this some air and some scrutiny, because it's overdue and it's
Mhm.
vital to protect freedom to access to read what you choose to read. That's the bottom line for me.
Yeah. It's interesting when I was a kid, in grade 6, so I'd be coming up at age 11, grade and age 12. And I remember my grandmother lived on the bus route, and on Fridays in particular, I used to um, ask the bus driver if he'd be so kind as to let me off at my grandmother's house. And of course, in small town Newfoundland, everyone knew everyone, and they knew that yes, indeed, this was my grandmother's house, and so he dropped me off, and I would spend the Friday night and Saturday and so on, and Saturday mornings. I would get up early and I'd go down into the basement, which was kind of like, the bowels of the earth, and but my grandmother kept my grandfather's old encyclopedia set from the 1940s. There was all kinds of books that my mother and my uncles and so on would have had in school, and there were like Gulliver's Travels and all of those old texts, Dickens and so on. And I mean, I just got right into it, like, big time. And some of those volumes I have in my library still. But it's like, here it is, the canon of the great books and all the rest of it, are things that, young people are now, perhaps going to be, not availed, and also, and I have a real problem as well with the fact that, our digital era doesn't have the actual experience. The young people don't have the experience of opening up a book and reading it. And so this kind of thing is a very, very disturbing thing, because young people, will not have that experience that I did, that kind of opened up my mind for.
Books present a danger in that regard, because they are a portal to discovery, information, imagination, all of those things. And the digital realm has removed that to a great
Mm,
degree. And on the topic of the digital realm, I have to add that the concern of the board and other elements about books causing harm is completely without context in our present era, when students are carrying around in their pocket, typically, a device that gives them access to far more harmful content,
oh,
ideas, whatever you,
yep.
than any library, school, or otherwise would have within its walls. So it's just such a ridiculous argument that they're protecting students, or anyone from harm, to use that as an excuse to get rid of a book. It's and here they are, as school boards, facilitating access to digital because it's free Wi-Fi. Now they have control systems to try to limit aspects of that, but students are very tech savvy. They have
Yep.
all sorts of ways around that, and in any case, with unlimited data these days, that's also can be irrelevant. So
Mm.
the digital era has significantly impacted the kind of imagination and discovery and journeys and exploration that you've described by going into your grandparents' basement.
Mm.
And that's another shameful outcome of this agenda.
Yeah, yeah. As I'm here listening, I'm like, you know what? For those of you who are watching, maybe the time is coming when we need our own private libraries. Maybe we need to open up a room in our houses where we can have access to books that are now somehow deemed unacceptable by those who are trying to control us. And uh, it's anyhow, it's one of the things that's kind of been in my mind, is to uh, is to maybe the time has come for us to take this as a personal responsibility to do what we can to preserve books, and to preserve the old books and to preserve the stories that they told and the history that we've had. I remember in Newfoundland we would talk about other things. About Newfoundland history. And there was a lot of negative things in Newfoundland history, I remember very clearly. And I've written about them in my more professional career. But things like the strife that happened between religious communities in Newfoundland, between the Protestants and Catholics. I mean, we were like Northern Ireland was, in the 1870s. There's a lots of conflict between Catholics and Protestants in Newfoundland, but there was something we could learn from, right? I mean, this is the whole point. We could learn that this is not how we are to treat one another and all the rest of it. But if you suddenly you don't even talk about that anymore, then you lose that opportunity to learn from the past.
And what's worse, if you're prevented from talking about it.
Prevented, yes. Yes. Now, so I want to talk about what the impact this has had on you personally, but I want to talk about some other things here. If you were to sit down with all of those who are making these decisions, how would you recommend that we deal with this situation?
Well, it would be pretty radical because I am a staunch defender of the freedom to read. And so any kind of control aspects I've resisted. And I mean, it doesn't affect me now. I'm out of the system, but those who remain, I mean, what I'm describing is a concern for many teacher librarians across many school boards. And it's the example that I've raised, as I have said earlier, is an extreme manifestation of this agenda that has now been put on pause. The minister yesterday issued a pause on these kinds of book calls. What that looks like means, it says pending an investigation. I have no idea what that means.
Right.
But because it is so ideologically driven, I don't really know what the reconciling would even look like, because it's such a polarization that is maybe irreconcilable, unless you adopt the position that I have defended, which is a library is neutral. It does not make a decision about defining what's harmful. But even our not governing, the Library Association, there's something called the Ontario Library Association. They've embraced this this kind of agenda. They won't call it censorship. It's a very deep-seated, ideologically driven agenda to get rid of these kinds of materials that they have deemed inappropriate to be in libraries. And that is a concerning position to take for a library, because now you are not neutral, and now you are an agent of politicization. That has, to me, the library has absolutely no business in that, ever. And so that's what I've tried to bring that argument to the fore.
And has there been have people been listening? Has there been a number of people who you've talked to say, hey, you know what? I see your point here. I think we should revisit this, or any movement of that sort?
Well, certainly not from anything official.
Okay.
But
I mean, even privately, are there any professionals saying, you know what, Larry, I think you're onto something?
Oh, yes. I've had colleagues express support, and certainly there's been decent support publicly, and positive response to the stories that have been published in the papers. So that's gratifying that it has sparked a conversation and a response that people are concerned about what's been going on, because it's necessary to have that public scrutiny. These institutions are accountable to the public, which is why, I use that word in my Substack. It is accountability that I seek for taking an action, and an extreme action, and destroying literature, ideas, and learning opportunity. That's why I use the word theft in my first Substack, because it is a theft of learning opportunity when you destroy learning materials, and within that, ideas and facts and so forth. So these are multi-layered aspects of this issue that I'm glad are getting the conversation and support and raising concern. It's very important that we do this.
Right. So, what is it your sense that this movement is afoot, right, across school libraries across the country? Is this your understanding?
What happened to Beal?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and we saw that in 2023 in the Peel Board, where the minister at that time, Lecce, had to issue a cease, basically, because they too were purging thousands of books from their libraries. And which is why I was a little surprised that it happened in my board a year later. But it's kind of the way of the land these days, I would say, which is, it doesn't matter. The rule of law is no longer the rule of law. It's the rule of lawlessness. And I'm going to do whatever I like, thumb my nose at it. And what are you going to do about it? That's the attitude that has been entrenched now. I use the word entitled because it's very evident that these institutions have become entitled to do these kinds of things that are outside the law or outside a process or whatever it is, and get away with it. We've experienced that in a union context, where boards have become very empowered to do things that aren't even within contractual language. They get away with it, even if it's grieved. It takes months, if not years, to work through a grievance, and even if it gets decided at the end, it's already a done deal.
Right. Right.
And so that institutional empowerment has been across the board. And what's happened in the libraries, it's just another example of that. We're going to do it anyway, and in this case, it's a done deal. Those books are gone.
They're gone. They're destroyed. And so, what are you going to do about it now? And unfortunately, I will say this: my observation of the law in recent years is that the courts have been consistently deferring to the experts. And so by deferring to the experts in making all kinds of administrative decisions, the courts basically are washing their hands from it. And that to me is, I love the way you've described that, because it is lawlessness in my view. It's a sense of we are the experts. We know what's what. We know what's right. And who are you, judge? Who are you, politician, or anyone else to tell us what to do?
And there's an important aspect to that contextually, which is, who is the expert? Who gets to decide who is the expert that you're listening to? Is it the expert on this side of the political spectrum, or the expert on this side of the political spectrum, or the scientific debate? It is a significant question of who gets. It's like defining harm. Who gets to define who is the expert and who you actually listen to? And when you, in a court process, when you deny a broad spectrum of experts to give expert testimony, you then have become a biased and subjective, lawless, agency, and that's why courts have become in disrepute, because they have silenced that spectrum of experts. And I'm concerned about that as well, because that is a manifestation of what I called lawlessness.
Yeah, absolutely. I see it as well, and I fully agree with you on this. Okay, so how do you see the role of libraries playing in the future educational landscape? I mean, especially when it comes to controversial or sensitive material. I mean, what role does a library have now? Is it just simply going to have one particular view about anything that's controversial, according to the experts?
Well, if the powers that be have their way, absolutely that is it. It will be sanitized to reflect a particular viewpoint, and no other viewpoints are allowed to be represented. That's very dangerous. That's not a kind of public forum that allows expression of ideas when you limit those kind of choices. And so if that's what a library is becoming, it's no longer a library. It's I don't know what it is. It's become
An ideological arm.
Yeah, an indoctrination center.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so that's that, if things are not changed, that is the direction we're certainly headed, is a complete sanitization and removal of the library. And maybe that's the ultimate agenda, is to get rid of libraries, because libraries, a functioning library that does reflect the broad spectrum of ideas, I've repeated a number of times in the conversation, that is a danger to the powers that be that want to limit the freedom of the exchange of ideas. And if that is the intent, that's where we're headed. And that's a huge concern, because that is not any kind of reflection of the future I want for myself, or I don't have any children, but for future generations, that looks pretty bleak.
Yeah, no, I agree. Absolutely. Okay, so let me ask you, is there any hope? Any hope for libraries to get back to their purpose?
Well, if voices like mine and there are others, if we're able to bring this conversation forward and have the proper kind of discourse, then there is hope. Absolutely. I mean, I'm not just defending myself and defending what happened to Beal. I'm trying to defend the future of ideas and expression and critical thinking and all of these aspects that are represented by a library. And if we don't protect that, then it will disappear, and that is a big concern. So I think there's enough response to this issue. I mean, it's been in the paper 4 days in a row, which I'm very grateful for. So, and it sparked these kinds of conversations that we're having. So I see those as indicators of hope. I'll take it as some elements of hope that we can at least shed some attention on what this actually looks like when it is executed the way it was. Because it definitely, I used the words the other day, an attack on the freedom of expression and information, because you are denying access when you affect what's available in a library.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, tell us, if you could share with the audience what price you've had to pay personally for your stand in this.
Well, initially, when I experienced the first 5,000 books that were destroyed a year ago now, January 2025, I responded by writing a Substack, and that, of course, drew the ire of the board, and they placed me on what's called home assignment for 2 months, and then at the end of that, I was suspended for 7 days unpaid as punishment.
Wow.
So, I mean, there's that cost. There's the financial cost that entailed. There's the kind of the emotional and mental aspect of that, in that when you're on that kind of um, suspension or home assignment, you're constantly wondering what's next, what's coming next, and so that persisted for 2 months, February and March, and into April. So that takes a bit of a toll, but all that did was set the stage for my eventual exit. I became eligible for retirement in April, but I wanted to finish the year, and then had some aspects of different things I wanted to complete during the summer before I said I wasn't going to return. There's some staffing aspects rolled into that as well. The staffing would have changed in the fall for me, for the library. I interpret it as punishment. I won't get into details, but there were definitely recourse for taking the position that I did. And so by retiring, it took me away from that control mechanism that would have significantly punished me. I mean, I was warned in the spring that it would be progressive discipline up to termination. So I terminated myself by retiring.
Well, because there's such an inclusive lot, and always concerned about people having the opportunity to have freedom of expression, and to having, we wouldn't want to have people to have a different idea of how things ought to be. I mean, it's just exasperating as to how hypocritical the so-called experts are. I have to admit, it really irritates me when I see this kind of stuff, and I've seen it over and over in my career. But Larry, I just want to thank you so very much for having the stamina, the integrity to stand up and to voice your opinion, and to be willing to say, "Hey, look, this is unacceptable." And I have to say to you, you do it in such wonderful form. You're showing grace. You're not getting how will I say, going on a rant, as I might from time to time. But it's it just really shows your professionalism, and I think anybody who's watched this interview would see your concern, your expertise, your professionalism, and so forth. And so I just want to encourage you to keep on keeping on, and speaking out on this. And I can tell you right now that as an organization, First Freedoms Foundations, we're very concerned about freedom of speech in Canada, and it just strikes me that this is but another example of the concerns as to the reasons why we even exist as an organization. And so I thank you for sharing, and being willing to to literally put yourself out there and say, "Hey, look what's happening." And I hope that our audience will certainly, they benefit. Yes, absolutely. But I hope they will get engaged, and we will have some information about how they might want to get engaged. Is there you mentioned your Substack. Can you give people your address for the Substack, and any other social media or any other material that you might have to keep people informed?
Well, I'm actually a fairly private person. It's not I'm not social. I don't have social media to speak of. My Substack, ironically, used the word rant earlier, just a few moments ago. My Substack title is "Rant Against the Machine," because I can pen a bit of a rant occasionally, and so that I chose that title because this is. I mean, it's not an emotional rant, but it is an impact, an impassioned plea for people to pay attention to these incursions into our private and public lives to place these controls on us. So it's called Rant Against the Machine. There's only the 3 posts at the moment, but I will be writing more into the future, and I really appreciate this opportunity to talk about these kinds of issues, because it's vital they are, and I appreciate the work that you're doing to help bring these to the fore, and I thank you for your kind words. So we just have to have this conversation in a public forum. Absolutely.
Right. Absolutely. Excellent. Well, thanks so much again. I really appreciate it. And folks, I want to thank you for being with us tonight as we have shared this important discussion about what is happening across the country when it comes to the libraries. I mean, who would have thought that we would be having a situation where, the debates that go on up in Ottawa about the definitions of hate, the definitions of harm, and all the rest of it, and all that has permeated down through society at large. It's but just a microcosm. What we have seen here and discussed with Larry today was just a microcosm of the net effect of the overall discussion that's going on in society, and we need to take it seriously, and we need to understand what that means. So I encourage you to go to our website at firstfreedoms.ca. There you'll be able to sign up for our newsletter. We try to send a newsletter out about once a week or thereabouts, so it's not like it's something you get every day. But it will help you keep informed as to the issues that's going on with freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and inviolability of the person. And so until next time, I'm Barry.